Along coastal margins, at the convergence of the world's land and ocean, lie some of the Earth's most important ecosystems: salt marshes, mangroves, and wetlands. Providing some of the Earth's most valuable natural functions to mankind, the culmination of such benefits are explicated in the term ecosystem services, or functions in natural systems that provide value to humans free of charge. There are four main types: provisioning, regulating, supporting, and cultural services. Provisioning services values are easy to quantify. These include raw materials such as timber, building material, and fisheries. In fact, 2/3 of the fish we eat spend part of their life in mangroves. Regulating services values are slightly harder to quantify. These functions help regulate natural phenomena. Mangroves, wetlands, and salt marshes provide storm surge protection. Forested riverfront areas slow floodwaters. This percolation filters sediment and pollutants, providing water filtration, which wouldn't happen without wetland environment. Wetlands also reduce erosion. Perhaps one of the most significant regulating services provided is carbon sequestration. Coastal wetlands hold the potential to store 5 times as much carbon as tropical forests, mainly in deep wetland soils. Soils solely from mangrove forests hold equivalent amounts of carbon of more than 2 years of global emissions, or 22 billion tons of carbon. Then you have supporting services such as fish nurseries, and cultural services such as indigenous fishing practices. Now that you understand mangroves and their importance, let's discuss threats. Coastal wetland ecosystems are found on every continent except Antarctica. Negative impacts are global in scale. Locally, since colonial times, almost 1/3 of Massachusetts wetlands have been destroyed. Thailand has lost 84% of its mangroves, the highest rate of mangrove loss in any nation, while the Ivory Coast, Guinea-Bissau, Tanzania, Mexico, Panama, Malaysia, Myanmar, Pakistan, and the Philippines each have lost more than 60% of their mangrove forests. The mangroves and salt marshes exhibit high sensitivity to sea level rise. Now, normally, mangroves can go backwards, unless there's coastal development impeding their progress. Agriculture and aquaculture also have significant impacts. Shrimp aquaculture often replaces wetland habitats with artificial ponds. Massive amounts of waste produced often pollute remaining habitat, and water diversions for ponds disrupt natural water flows, keeping wetlands healthy.
Of the current 53.2 million hectares of coastal wetland in existence, 12.6 million hectares are already protected. Historically, one notable conservation policy is the Clean Water Act of 1972. Section 404 of the Clean Water Act requires individuals to obtain a permit before discharging dredged or fill material into waters of the United States, including most wetlands. The Swamp Buster provisions of the Food Security Act of 1985 withhold certain federal farm program benefits from farmers who convert or modify wetlands. Together, these two programs have helped reduce the rate at which wetlands are converted to agriculture and other uses. However, perhaps most notable of the current conservative legislation protecting wetlands is the Wetlands Protection Act of 1972, administered by the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. This was the first of many wetland protection laws in the nation. This policy protects wetlands and the public interest they serve, including flood control, prevention of pollution and storm damage, and protection of public and private water supplies, groundwater supply, fisheries, land containing shellfish, and wildlife habitat. So, how is the WPA implemented? At the local level, an assembly designated a Communities Conservation Commission administers the Wetland Protection Act. This commission is a volunteer board of 3 to 7 members appointed by the selection or city council. It ensures that proposed activities will not alter resource areas. By the mid-1980s, every town and city in Massachusetts had a conservation commission. On the state level, the Department of Environmental Protection oversees administration of the law. Other criteria to consider when evaluating the efficiency of the WPA. This law regulates many types of work in resource areas, including vegetation removal, regrading, and construction of houses, decks, driveways, and commercial or industrial buildings. Essentially, if you want to work in a wetland resource area or within 100 feet of a wetland, an area called the buffer zone, you must ask the Conservation Commission before you start work. Also, the State Wetlands Protection Act and Rivers Protection Act establish rigorous restrictions and oversight of real estate development in and near coastal and inland wetland areas. Given the sheer scope of protection of two major acts, many homeowners are often surprised to learn their property contains or is near protected wetlands. It is also notable most cities and towns adopt local zoning or non-zoning wetland ordinances or bylaws that are actually stricter than the act itself. Now, what are the penalties for violating the law? A 1989 amendment to the WPA considers each daily violation of the Act as a separate offense, commonly known as a continuing violation. This alone is likely the WPA's greatest strength. Penalties based upon continuing violations de-incentivizes accepting a penalty in exchange for continued exploitation of the wetland environment. If the penalty was a one-off, corporations could accept the penalty as the cost of business and simply continue to exploit. When the penalty grows by the day, that just isn't feasible. Violators are punishable by a maximum fine of $25,000 and or not more than 2 years of imprisonment. Additionally, landowners are generally mandated to restore illegally altered land to its original condition. Overall, these various criteria enhance the effectiveness of the WPA. But what are some limitations?
While discussed benefits are undeniable, the WPA has its gaps. While preparation of new land for agricultural use is not exempt, normal maintenance and improvement of land currently in agricultural use is exempt from the provisions of the Act. This is likely the WPA's greatest weakness. Some agricultural practices can lead to increased levels of nutrients and pollutant loads in the form of pesticides, fertilizers, and animal feces, resulting in increased phytoplankton and aquatic plant growth, leading to eutrophication and ultimately hypoxic dead zones. The regulation of rivers and streams can change the frequency, duration, and extent of flows, affecting critical life stages of water-dependent species, including fish and water birds. To prevent such disastrous impacts, expanding the scope of the law to cover currently owned agricultural land continuously polluting wetlands could help reduce non-point source pollution. Heftier fines could increase exponentially. That way, the continuous penalty becomes even harsher over time. Finally, literally expand the extent of the protected area, expand the buffer zones so that the conventional buffer zone is itself more protected.
Despite discussed potential improvements, the Wetland Protection Act of 1972, the United States' first form of wetland protection legislation, has effectuated undeniable benefits. Through continuous violation policies, stringent penalties, and accompanying legislation fortifying the scope of protected regions, the WPA has protected various wetland regions. This intervention likely deserves an A-. While effective, gaps should be addressed to reduce agricultural development's ramifications of wetland ecosystems. Hopefully, we can preserve some of Earth's most important ecosystems, accompanying biodiversity and ecosystem services while we still have the chance.